Let's start by breaking a very common assumption. When people hear that designers and contractors are always fighting, the first reaction is usually something like this. Oh, that's just ego. Designers are unrealistic. Contractors just don't care about quality. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of the time, they're not fighting because they dislike each other. They're fighting because they're standing in completely different places, looking at the same project, but living in totally different realities. And once you see that, a lot of these arguments suddenly make sense. Let me put it this way. A designer and a contractor can look at the exact same wall, on the exact same project, on the exact same day, and still be talking about two completely different things. Not because one of them is lying, not because one of them is stupid, but because their jobs force them to care about different risks. Designers live in a world of intent. What should this building be? What does it mean? What does it look like, feel like, represent? They're trained to think forward, to imagine the finished thing, clean, complete, perfect. No dust, no noise, no delays. Contractors live in a world of consequences. What happens if this detail doesn't work on site? What happens if the material arrives late? What happens if this wall is 20 millimeters off? They're trained to think in failure modes, in delays, costs, safety, responsibility. So when these two people meet, they're not just exchanging opinions, they're defending survival strategies. That's the part most outsiders don't see. To a designer, a project is a vision that needs protection. To a contractor, a project is a risk that needs control. And risk changes how people talk. Here's something interesting. If you listen carefully to arguments on site, they almost never start with architecture. They start with phrases like, "Who's responsible if this fails? Who's paying for this change? Can you guarantee this will work?" Those aren't design questions. Those are fear questions. And fear doesn't speak politely. When a designer insists, "This detail is important, we can't compromise," what they're really saying is, if this gets changed, the whole idea collapses. When a contractor pushes back with, "This isn't practical," what they're really saying is, if we do this and it goes wrong, I'm the one who gets blamed. Same project, same goal, different threats. And here's where the misunderstanding really begins. Designers often assume contractors are resisting because they're lazy or because they don't get the design. Contractors often assume designers don't care about reality or that they've never set foot on a construction site. Both assumptions are wrong, but they feel right in the heat of the moment. Because pressure narrows perspective. A designer usually joins the project early, before the noise, before the dust, before things start going wrong. At that stage, everything is still flexible. Ideas feel light. Changes feel cheap. A contractor often joins when things are already locked in. Deadlines exist. Budgets are tight. Mistakes cost real money. So when a designer says, "It's just a small change," they're thinking conceptually. When a contractor hears, "It's just a small change," they're mentally calculating extra labor, rework, delays, phone calls, arguments with suppliers, paperwork. Same sentence, two translations. And that's why these arguments feel so emotional. They're not debating taste, they're negotiating exposure to risk. Another thing people underestimate is accountability. Designers are accountable in a long, slow way. Their work is judged over time, by clients, by critics, sometimes by history. Contractors are accountable immediately. If something goes wrong today, they deal with it today. Inspectors, clients, lawyers, insurance. That urgency hardens people. So when a contractor sounds blunt or defensive, it's usually not arrogance, it's experience talking. And when a designer sounds stubborn or idealistic, it's usually not ignorance, it's responsibility to the original idea. This is why shouting matches don't fix anything, because neither side is actually arguing about the same thing. One side is arguing about meaning, the other is arguing about consequences, and both think they're being perfectly reasonable. Here's the part that really messes people up. From the outside, it looks like a personality clash. From the inside, it feels like self-defense. That's why even good people, smart people, experienced professionals can end up talking past each other. They're not fighting over walls or drawings. They're fighting over who carries the risk when reality hits. Once you understand that, the question stops being, why are they always arguing? And becomes, how could they not argue? Because the system puts them there. Next, we'll dig into what each side is actually afraid of and why those fears almost guarantee friction even when everyone wants the project to succeed.
If you really want to understand why designers and contractors clash, you have to stop asking who's right and start asking what each side is afraid of, because fear shapes behavior far more than opinions ever do. Let's start with designers. Designers are afraid of losing control. Not control in a power-hungry way, but control over the idea itself. Most people don't realize how fragile a design concept actually is. On paper, everything looks solid, clear lines, clean geometry, confident decisions. But in reality, a design can fall apart very quickly, not because it's bad, but because it gets slowly chipped away. One change here, a temporary workaround there, a material substitution nobody really discusses. By the time the building is finished, the designer walks in and thinks, this isn't what I designed, but I can't even point to one single moment where it went wrong. That fear is very real. So when a designer pushes back hard on a detail, what they're often protecting isn't ego. They're protecting coherence. They're thinking, if this detail changes, then that detail has to change, and then the whole logic unravels. Designers live in systems. Everything is connected. But here's the problem. That fear is mostly invisible to contractors. From the contractor's side, it just sounds like, why are you making this such a big deal? Now let's flip it. Contractors are afraid of being the last one holding the bag. Construction is full of uncertainty. Weather changes, materials get delayed, subcontractors mess up, measurements aren't perfect. Someone always has to absorb that uncertainty, and very often, that someone is the contractor. When a contractor hears a designer insist on a detail, they're not thinking about beauty or purity. They're thinking, if this doesn't work on site, who pays for the fix? If the inspector fails this, who explains it? If this takes longer than planned, who eats the cost? Those questions don't show up on drawings, but they show up on invoices and schedules and legal letters. So contractors become defensive by necessity, not because they enjoy saying no, but because every yes creates another potential liability. This is where the conversation breaks down. Designers are trained to optimize for intention. Contractors are trained to optimize for outcome. One side fears compromise, the other fears exposure. And fear doesn't negotiate nicely. Here's something subtle but important. Designers usually worry about how the project will be judged. Contractors usually worry about how the project will fail. Those are very different mental frames. A designer might ask, will this still read as the idea we intended? A contractor might ask, will this pass inspection? Will it hold up? Will it cause problems later? Neither question is wrong, but when they're asked in the same meeting, they sound like they're coming from different planets. Another layer people miss is timing. Design decisions are often made early when everything feels flexible. Construction problems appear late when flexibility is gone. So designers are often defending decisions made in calm conditions, while contractors are reacting under pressure. That imbalance matters. Imagine defending a choice you made 6 months ago while someone else is dealing with the consequences today. That alone can create tension. And then there's responsibility.
Designers carry reputational risk. Contractors carry operational risk. A bad design can damage a designer's credibility. A construction mistake can shut down a site. One is long-term and abstract, the other is immediate and concrete. So when a contractor pushes for a safer, simpler solution, it's not always about cutting corners. It's about minimizing the number of things that can go wrong at 7 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. Meanwhile, when a designer resists simplification, it's not always about being precious. It's about preventing the project from slowly turning into something generic. Both fears are valid. They're just incompatible if nobody acknowledges them. And here's the quiet truth most people don't say out loud. The system rewards conflict. Contracts divide responsibility. Schedules punish delays. Budgets punish uncertainty. Very few systems reward collaboration. So even when individuals try to be reasonable, the structure pushes them apart. That's why you'll see the same argument happen again and again with different people on different projects. Not because those people are bad at their jobs, but because the fears are baked in. Once you understand that, the shouting starts to sound less personal. It's not, "You don't respect my work." It's, "I don't want to be the one blamed when this goes wrong." That realization doesn't magically stop arguments, but it changes the tone. Because when you see fear instead of stubbornness, you stop trying to win and start trying to translate. In the next part, we'll talk about the biggest translation failure of all, why drawings and real construction sites almost never speak the same language. And once you see that gap, a lot of these fights suddenly feel inevitable.
At some point, almost every argument between designers and contractors comes down to one thing. The drawings say one thing, the site says another. And the problem isn't that drawings are wrong. The problem is that drawings are silent about reality. A drawing is a promise. A construction site is a negotiation. On paper, everything is clean. Lines meet perfectly, walls are straight, spaces are exactly the size they're supposed to be. On site, nothing is that polite. Concrete isn't poured by lasers. Steel isn't placed by robots. People work fast, in bad weather, under pressure. Tiny deviations pile up. 2 millimeters here, 5 millimeters there. On paper, that doesn't matter. On site, it can break an entire detail. But drawings don't show tolerances. They don't show dust, noise, or fatigue. They don't show the moment someone realizes two systems want to occupy the same space. So when a designer looks at a drawing and says, "This should work," they're not lying. They're just speaking a different language. Design drawings describe intention, not sequence. They say what something should be, not how it survives being built step by step. Contractors, on the other hand, live inside the sequence. They don't see a wall. They see when it gets built, who builds it, what happens before it, what happens after it. They see trades crossing paths. They see timing conflicts. They see mistakes waiting to happen. That's why a detail that looks elegant on paper can feel dangerous on site. Here's a common moment. A contractor points at a drawing and says, "This connection is going to be very hard to build." The designer hears, "You didn't think this through." But what the contractor usually means is, "There's no room for error here." In reality, always has error. Drawings assume ideal conditions. Sites operate under non-ideal conditions. That gap creates friction. Another issue is that drawings freeze decisions. Once something is drawn, approved, and issued, it becomes official. Changing it later feels like failure. For designers, changes feel like erosion. For contractors, changes feel like adaptation. One side sees instability, the other sees survival. That's why contractors often suggest alternatives that designers resist, not because they want to cheapen the design, but because they're trying to add margin for reality, margin for human error, margin for material variation, margin for things going wrong. Designers are often taught to remove margin, to sharpen ideas, to eliminate excess. Contractors are taught to add margin, to buffer systems, to prepare for failure. Same project, opposite instincts. And then there's the issue of information density. A drawing might look detailed, but it can never include everything.
Not every screw, not every tolerance, not every on-site decision. So contractors fill in the gaps. That's not optional. That's how construction works. But every gap filled is also a moment where intent can be lost. Designers worry about that. They should. Contractors worry about something else. They worry about being blamed for decisions they were forced to make on the fly. So you get this strange tension. Designers want certainty. Contractors operate in uncertainty. And drawings sit awkwardly in between, pretending the world is more predictable than it is. This is why so many arguments start with a sentence like, "But it's clearly shown on the drawings." That sentence sounds strong, but in reality, it's fragile. Because drawings don't show what happens when two trades arrive out of order, what happens when materials change, what happens when dimensions don't match reality. Contractors know this. Designers often learn it the hard way. Neither side is wrong. They're just using different maps, and maps are not the territory. Once you accept that drawings and reality will never fully align, a lot of the emotion drains out of these fights. The question stops being, "Why can't you just follow the drawings?" and becomes, "How do we adjust without breaking the idea?" That's a harder question, and it leads directly to the next layer of conflict: communication. Because even when both sides want the same outcome, they often don't realize they're speaking entirely different languages. Next, we'll look at why so many arguments aren't really about disagreement at all. They're about translation failure.
By the time a project reaches construction, most people assume the hard part is over. The drawings are done, the intent is clear, everyone has the same information. So if arguments keep happening, it must be a communication problem, right? Not exactly. Most conflicts between designers and contractors don't come from missing information. They come from the same words meaning different things. Everyone is speaking English, but they're not speaking the same language. Take a phrase you hear all the time: "This should be fine." To a designer, that often means, "I've thought this through conceptually, and it fits the overall idea." To a contractor, it sounds like, "I haven't tested this in real conditions, but I'm comfortable with the risk." That's a huge gap. Or another classic one: "Let's keep it simple." A designer might mean, "Let's reduce visual noise and clarify the form." A contractor hears, "Let's reduce steps, parts, and things that can go wrong." Same sentence, completely different objectives. This is why meetings can feel so frustrating. Everyone leaves the room thinking they agreed. Then the site does something else. Then emails start flying. Not because someone lied, but because agreement was assumed, not translated. Design language is abstract by nature. Words like clean, light, minimal, elegant, refined. These are powerful in design. They guide intention. But on site, they don't instruct action. A contractor can't build elegant. They build dimensions, tolerances, sequences. So when a designer says, "This detail needs to feel lighter," the contractor isn't being difficult when they ask, "Okay, how?" That question sounds dismissive, but it's actually a request for translation. On the other side, contractors use words that sound neutral but carry weight. This might be an issue. This is risky. This could cause delays. To a contractor, these are warning signals, experience talking. To a designer, they can sound vague or exaggerated. An issue compared to what? Risky in what way? Delays, how long? So designers sometimes push back, not realizing the contractor is already imagining worst-case scenarios. Another common failure point is tone. Contractors tend to communicate under pressure, short sentences, direct statements. Not because they're rude, but because time matters. Designers tend to communicate defensively, carefully, with qualifiers. Not because they're unsure, but because they're protecting an idea. Those styles clash. A contractor says, "This won't work." A designer hears, "You don't understand my design." A designer says, "We should explore alternatives." A contractor hears, "You're reopening a decision that's already costing us time." No one says what they actually mean. What they mean is, "I'm worried. I'm exposed here. I don't want this to blow up later." But that language almost never gets used.
Because construction culture doesn't reward vulnerability, it rewards certainty. So people argue through proxies. They argue about details when the real argument is about trust. Do you trust that this will work? Do you trust that I won't be blamed? Do you trust that my concern is real? Most arguments are really about that. And here's the uncomfortable part. The more experienced someone is, the more compressed their language becomes. They've seen this before. They know where it ends, so they skip explanation. But skipping explanation increases misunderstanding. Experience, ironically, makes translation harder. This is why junior people often struggle the most. They hear strong statements without context. They see conflict but don't understand its origin, and they assume it's personal. It usually isn't. It's shorthand colliding with shorthand. Another layer is documentation. Emails, RFIs, site notes. These are meant to clarify, but they often harden positions. Once something is written down, it feels official. A casual concern becomes a recorded risk. A suggestion becomes a demand. So people choose words strategically, not to be clear, but to protect themselves. That's when communication becomes legal, not human. And that's when trust erodes fastest. The tragedy is that most of these conflicts are avoidable, not by talking more, but by translating better. By turning "this is important to the design" into "if we change this, 3 other things stop working." By turning "this is risky" into "here's exactly how this can fail on site." When translation happens, the temperature drops. People stop defending positions and start solving problems. But translation takes effort and time and patience, things the system rarely gives you. So instead, people default to arguing, not because they want to, but because it's faster. Next, we'll look at why this gets even worse on large projects and how contracts and systems quietly push designers and contractors into opposing camps, even when they don't want to be there.
There's a strange pattern in construction. Small projects argue less. Big projects argue more. And it's not because big projects have worse people. It's because big projects are built on systems that amplify conflict. As projects grow, everything becomes formal. More contracts, more consultants, more approvals, more paperwork. On paper, that looks like control. In reality, it often creates distance. Distance between decisions and consequences. Distance between intention and execution. And that distance is where conflict lives. Let's talk about contracts. Most construction contracts are designed to manage risk, not to encourage collaboration. They define who is responsible when something goes wrong. Sounds reasonable. But here's the side effect. The moment a problem appears, everyone's first instinct becomes self-protection. Designers protect intent and liability. Constructors protect cost and schedule. Instead of asking, "How do we fix this?" the question quietly shifts to, "Whose problem is this?" Once that happens, positions harden. People stop sharing uncertainty because uncertainty can be used against you. So problems stay hidden longer than they should. And when they finally surface, they're bigger, more expensive, more emotional. Another factor is specialization. Big projects involve many layers of expertise: fire consultants, facade specialists, acoustics, sustainability, structure, MEP. Each discipline optimizes its own slice, but no one fully owns the whole. Designers coordinate, constructors integrate. Those are not the same thing. Coordination assumes compatibility. Integration deals with collision. So constructors often become the place where conflicts land. When systems clash on site, it's not a design problem or an engineering problem. It's a construction problem. That alone creates tension. Then there's the schedule. Big projects run on tight timelines. Delays cost real money, so flexibility disappears fast. Design changes that might have been manageable early become explosive later. But designers often discover issues late because that's when complexity reveals itself.
So they're forced to push changes at the worst possible time. Constructors push back, not out of spite, but because the schedule can't absorb the shock. Both sides are trapped by timing. And then there's hierarchy. In large projects, decision-making is layered. Messages travel up and down chains. By the time a concern reaches the person who can approve a change, it's already been simplified, softened, or politicized. What started as a technical issue becomes a positional argument. People defend what they think others are watching. That's when ego enters the room. Not personal ego, but organizational ego. No one wants their team to look incompetent. So people stop saying, "I'm not sure." They say, "This was approved." That phrase kills collaboration faster than almost anything else because it shifts the conversation from solving a problem to defending a decision. Another quiet driver of conflict is uneven risk distribution. On many projects, risk flows downhill. Design risk sits with designers. Construction risk sits with constructors. But uncertainty doesn't respect that boundary. So when something falls between scopes, it creates a fight. Everyone is technically right and practically stuck. The bigger the project, the more gaps like that exist, and every gap is a potential argument. What makes this especially frustrating is that most people on these projects are competent and well-intentioned. They want the building to succeed, but the system doesn't reward cooperation. It rewards documentation, position keeping, defensibility. So even good relationships get strained, not because trust was never there, but because the structure keeps testing it. That's why you'll hear people say, "This project feels more political than technical." They're not wrong. The technical problems are solvable. The political ones are exhausting. And here's the hard truth. You can't eliminate conflict on large projects, but you can decide how early it happens. Early conflict is productive. Late conflict is destructive. The tragedy is that most systems discourage early conflict. They push it downstream until it explodes on site. Next week, we'll talk about what actually helps, not ideal solutions, but realistic ones. How teams that still argue manage to build better projects anyway.
So after all this, here's the uncomfortable answer. No, designers and contractors will never stop arguing. And honestly, they probably shouldn't. Because a project with no tension at all is usually a project where someone stopped caring. The real difference between bad projects and good ones isn't whether conflict exists, it's when it happens and how it's handled. Bad projects push conflict downstream. They delay hard conversations. They hide uncertainty behind approvals and paperwork. So when problems finally surface, they explode, on site, under pressure, with money and reputations on the line. Good projects do the opposite. They argue early. They argue while things are still flexible. They argue when changes are cheap. Not politely, not perfectly, but honestly. In those projects, designers don't just defend drawings, they explain systems. They say, if we change this, here's what else breaks. And contractors don't just say no, they explain consequences. They say, if we build it this way, here's where it can fail. That kind of argument feels slower, messier, but it builds trust, because everyone can see the risk on the table. Another thing good projects do differently is accept that no one owns the whole truth. Designers understand the idea best. Contractors understand reality best. Neither perspective is complete on its own. When that's acknowledged, arguments stop being about winning and start being about alignment. That doesn't mean everyone agrees. It means disagreement becomes useful. There's also a quiet shift in language. Instead of, "This is wrong," you hear, "This is where I'm worried." Instead of, "That's not my scope," you hear, "This falls between us. Let's decide who carries it." Those phrases don't remove conflict. They lower the temperature. And temperature matters. Because once things get emotional, people stop listening. They start recording. Emails get copied, positions harden, solutions shrink. Good teams recognize that moment and slow things down.
Not because they have more time, but because they know speed without alignment is just expensive chaos. Here's the part most people don't like hearing. Good projects aren't built by avoiding conflict. They're built by people who are comfortable inside it. People who can argue without making it personal, who can say, "I disagree," without meaning, "I don't respect you." That skill isn't taught in school. It's learned the hard way, through projects that went wrong, through fights that cost too much, which is why experienced teams argue differently. They don't shout less, they explain more. They don't compromise faster, they clarify longer. And they know one thing beginners often don't. If designers and contractors stop arguing entirely, something has already failed. So the next time you see a heated discussion on site or a tense meeting around a table, don't assume it's dysfunction. Sometimes it's the sound of a building being negotiated into existence. And that's not pretty, but it's real.